Hello, everyone, and good morning. Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Scribe and the Wandering Quill. We are joined today by another author for another author interview. And this guest now marks my third author from the LA Festival of Books. She is the author of the Last Lumenian series, which, if you remember this book, I had it featured on my channel in an initial book impressions. And if you watched that episode, I loved it. I loved the story. I loved the characters. It was a fantastic read. And to tell us more about it is the author herself, S.G.Blaise. S.G.Blaise, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much, Gabriel, for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So let's get the ball rolling. So tell us about yourself and tell us how you came up with the story for The Last Lumenian.
My name is S.G.Blaise. I'm a sci-fi fantasy author of the multi-award-winning Last Lumenian saga, featuring a 19-year-old rebel princess who must defeat the Dark God before he finds her. I came up with this story during a 2012 cross-country vacation road trip, and the idea came to me in a dream. Can you believe that? So I woke up in the middle of the night. I believe we were in Austria, and I had this idea. I had to write it down. And imagine this is pitch dark, everyone's sleeping, and I'm trying to jot it down on my phone. And that idea turned into this 10-year writing journey, working on the fifth book, fourth book coming out this December. Surreal, right?
Right. That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, let's actually start from The Last Lumenian. So, would you say that The Last Dominion is different from a lot of other stories of its kind? Because if I remember correctly, from what you told me about this great selling pitch, it's Princess Bride meets Star Wars. And that's probably a very, very unique selling pitch. So, just how did you come up with that? That's the story that I want to tell because it's a great story.
Oh, thank you, Gabriel. The reason I used Star Wars meets Lord of the Rings meets Princess Bride pitch because I was hoping readers who love those stories might enjoy this series because they would find intergalactic wars, space travel, empires, like in Star Wars. You know,
Right.
rich world building, magic, gods, good battle with good and evil, chosen one, like in those first two, Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. And of course, a diverse cast of characters who are quirky, funny, humorous, mild romance. I like to call my series a kissing book only, just as, homage to Princess Bride. So I was hoping that this would create an idea in the reader's mind that they might say, you know what, I'd like to take a chance on this brand new series I never heard of based on those, recommendations.
And honestly, those are great descriptions of the book because it is really, really good. The storytelling is amazing. The world building is incredible. And I can imagine for getting this book on paper, it must have taken like a long time. So growing up, were you like a writer, like an invested writer, or did that kind of come across naturally or gradually, I should say, over time?
It's a great question, Gabriel. I had a dream. Dreams are very important in my life when I was around 10 years old. And it
All
was about
right.
a story. It was about a spider with crab-like pincers, and it was very scary, chasing my brother and I, and no parents at home. And I remember about halfway through this really scary dream, I grabbed control and I became the hero of this movie-like dream where we trapped the creature and saved the day, and then the parents came home the end, right? So that was my first horror story. And when I
Right.
wrote it down, I had this amazing feeling that I need to share. I need to share it with my classmates. So the next day, I read it with the permission of my teacher. And believe it or not, they were laughing at the humorous parts, they were clapping at the end, and I was hooked. That's how I started on my journey. I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I also knew that I needed a good job to support my writing habit. So I
Right.
took a couple of twists and turns before I could get to writing. And then I moved to Boston, Massachusetts in 2001. And I realized I didn't speak a word in English.
Oh,
So
okay.
that was a big wrench thrown into the whole being, dreaming of becoming an author, because I thought, well, that's an obstacle. How do I overcome that obstacle?
Right.
Right. And it took 10 years to become fluent in English. And funny thing, I had 12 years of passive English knowledge, but it shows you that if you don't have immersive English, lessons, it's just passive knowledge that does not translate into speaking. I could
Mm.
write, but I could barely understand, the words, and I couldn't, respond in English. So that was the crucial turning point. Once I became fluent, and then we had that trip, I think my mind said to me, okay, you're ready. Here is an idea. Go with it.
Wow. That's actually really cool. Really, really impactful. And going back to what you said of how when you presented your story to your teacher and wanted to share it, and now transitioning to the Last Lumenian, do you remember what the initial feedback was like when you first pitched the idea to friends and family and to potential publishers? And do you remember the first review you ever got from the Last Lumenian?
Well, here is the thing, Gabriel. Only my husband knew that I was writing, and that's because I had this whole year of kind of a hesitation.
Right.
From 2012 to 2013, I was scared to start. I thought it's
Okay.
hard to get published, and I had all kinds of explanation and logics of why I shouldn't write that idea, shouldn't write that book. So my husband was very patient, and he said, you need to sit down and write this book. And that was 2013 April, and I wrote 150 pages in 1 month. It was like floodgates opening, right? So
Right.
my family didn't know about this because I was embarrassed to call myself a writer. I don't know if it because it was so new that I wanted to protect it. And it's also very vulnerable when you're an author. You're opening up your soul, your heart,
Mm-hmm.
your thoughts, and you invite the readers in to share those thoughts with you, right? So it was such an interesting feeling of what do I do with this, right? And it
Right.
took probably 6 to 8 years before I was
Wow.
confident enough to say it out loud with confidence that I am an author and I'm proud to be an author.
Dang, that's incredible. So when you finally did get the confidence to begin writing, what was the initial response back from people who bought a copy of the book? We were kind of like a little nervous of what the initial reviews are because I can imagine being like a first time author getting your first book out. It's kind of scary and like full of anxiety to like wonder what the first review is going to be because that's what's going to be like the staple for your book from then on.
The first initial reaction were surreal and positive, overwhelmingly positive. I had a soft launch that I did in 2020 January. This is right before the whole pandemic would start, right? We didn't
Oh,
have it.
okay.
So I had a friend who organized the Q&A with inviting his friends and my family. So it was a very welcoming and no risk, no pressure environment with about 10 to 15 people who would receive the book. They were asked to read it beforehand and come back with questions so we could kind of test the waters of what it feels like. Most of the people I didn't know, I never met. So when they told me that not only they read the book and loved it, but they reread it 2, 3 times, it
Wow.
it was like this the hair was like goosebumps, and I was just like in awe and shock, and I'm like, you reread the book without anyone threatening you? Like, that's gotta be awesome. I was on cloud nine, Gabriel. And then the first reviews were coming in, and 5 star, 4 star. And it's such an amazing feeling when you get to see your readers and fans of what they think about your series, what they get out of that book. It's always such a special feeling.
It is. I can't imagine. I can't imagine. And speaking for myself, when I got my actually almost kind of the same line you were, when I actually began writing my book, The Gathering, it was at the height of the pandemic. I was still in graduate school and I was up in San Francisco. And just around March, when they said we have to leave, Um, I had to go back to SoCal. Everything was online. I had nothing to do. I had my old story notes that I began writing back in undergrad, back in I want to say 2016. So I said, well, I got enough time in my hands. Let's get it done. And I finished it by the end of the year. That was the first draft, and then a series of revisions, and then it got published this year, which is incredible. And when I initially started that, I made a promise to myself and to my readers that this is going to be a book that's going to highlight the stories that I loved growing up. And was that kind of along the lines of the same thing as you when you were publishing The Last Lumenian, that there was a promise you're making to your readers and to yourself that this is a book that's going to be like Lord of the Rings, like Star Wars, like The Princess Bride. It's going to have all these familiar elements.
Absolutely. And this is very important to me because when, I grew up in Hungary during the second half of Soviet oppression, so Hollywood movies were largely forbidden to watch. When they
Right.
premiered in the theater, you either watched it or you missed it. That was it. There was no second chance to rewatch them. And my dad really didn't like that idea because his children were very young at the time and he couldn't just take a baby to the theater. They're not going to remember, right? So he
Right.
smuggled these movies in, translated them from English to Hungarian, used his own voice to dub it because we were not allowed to really speak and learn English. And we had
Mm.
movie nights. So that's how I got to experience Star Wars movies, Indiana Jones, Terminator, Back to the Future, all these movies that most people didn't watch or they may have seen in the movies. And I feel like that shaped my imagination. That created this magical experience that I'm looking for sharing with my readers and fans, that I promise them that you're going to be entertained. You're going to feel escape from reality. You're going to get recharged because that's the goal here, is to create something where we can connect and we can be same because we enjoy these stories together.
I 100% agree. I honestly believe that because I tend to think all stories that we read have some element of things we've grown up, even like with movies and stuff like that. And that's almost the very same thing with my book, To the Gathering, that it is a hallmark to films like El Cid with Charlton Heston, the original Magnificent Seven, Lord of the Rings, the films, and a little bit of Redwall by Brian Jones. All of these stories come together and they influence us, they impact us and how we write and how we tell stories, which I think is very important. Which then actually kind of leads into another question, which I think is important. I always like asking this question is, do you feel that your promise has been validated, that you've honored your reader's request in saying that this is the story that's really going to impact you?
I want to say that my readers and fans feel that the promise has been validated. They have been coming back to tell me, after they started reading the book, that they loved it, which is always such a pleasure to hear, especially when we're during a Comic Con. It's a very, uh, taxing and fun event. But, at the end of the day, most people just fall into bed. They're tired. I know I do that. So for them to start reading the book and then come back to the same place the next day, cutting across that huge convention center, just to let
Yes.
them know they love the book, that is so special, so magical, such an amazing connection. And it really is what makes me keep going as an author because I live for that. It's the second wind in my sail.
Awesome, awesome. And actually, speaking of that, and going back to what you said in the beginning about getting the process started, so this next question is probably another really important one, and probably a little bit of reflection too, which is a lot of others who I've had on this podcast. They've always said there have been moments that I've wanted to take a break from writing, or I didn't feel as inspired, or some things were coming up. And normally, because to write, it is a job, it is a commitment because you have to give hours, if not months, and sometimes years to get this thing off the page. And sometimes it may not even be the number one, it may not even be the thing that really gets your name out, but they still keep going. So when you began writing The Last Lumenian, what was your drive to keep you going? Why did you write?
I write because I'm a storyteller and it's who I am. Writing is not what I do, it's who I am. I'm an avid reader and a storyteller. And when you start out writing, often the case is that you learn how to create a book. You know, there's an underlying structure that makes your story shine. You know, it's the vehicle to deliver your art. And everyone discovers what that looks like, you know, what by looking, you know, reading at how-to books, going to conferences, and discovering that this is the best way to tell my story, right? So
Right.
there is a learning process simultaneously happening while you're creating your art and you're discovering what your story is about, right? So it's a really precious and wonderful time. Yes, it can feel like that there are blocks, but I firmly believe they're not blocks. They're actually your mind telling you to slow down. We need to understand this part. You know, maybe you just got
Right.
to when you're doing suspense, right? So your brain
Hmm.
needs a little bit of time to kind of wrap its mind, you know, wrap its head around it, because it is learning. You can't just have 100% full on every day for 24/7, because you need that break. So I believe breaks included purposefully is what helps you to avoid big chunks of blocks. And I often believe that when you stop, your brain is telling you something's not right here. Maybe the characters are not behaving the way they should, or maybe there
Right.
is something more to expand on. So I take this as a back burner thinking. You know, I take a step back, I go for a walk, I take a day off, maybe a whole weekend. And by the end of it, I have an idea, either through a dream or just something happens. You know, I talk to my son and boom, there is the solution.
I 100% agree with that because you're right. Breaks are important when it comes to writing because we have to also realize, as writers, when we write these characters, we think, oh, these characters are great. This is like the perfect. But when we step back and look at it fresher, we realize, is that really how we want them to go about? Shouldn't they go around this? And sometimes it hurts to change it because, you put a lot of effort into this, but sometimes it's required because writing is not just a one and done. It's a one and 100 edits, 100 drafts to actually get it right. And sometimes we'll even do research to even see how would a character go about in this way. How would the story flow in this part? And that comes from reading other works of fiction or other types of stories. So for you, S.G.Blaise, what stories would you say have really impacted your writing style and your voice as an author?
Gabriel, I want to say every book I ever read.
Of course.
My apologies. I have a little bit of allergies going on. My eyes just won't stop peering. I'm so
Oh,
sorry.
it's fine. You're good.
But, you know, when I started out as a child, I didn't like reading. And my
Really?
dad, oh my gosh, no. My dad was like, this is a great author. It's humorous. P.J. Howard, you need to read this. And I kept saying, no, thank you. No, thank you. And then he passed away when I was 13.
Oh,
And I remember I think he went to the bookcase, you know, that was housing all these books my dad collected from libraries.
right.
And I picked the book he was recommending and I read it standing by that bookcase in about a few hours. It was very short, like 200 pages, little small book, right?
Mhm.
So I remember the impact of reading that first book. It was so funny. I forgot what was happening. I felt connected to my dad. I wasn't grieving. I wasn't sad. So I kept taking the books off the shelf. I kept reading it. My dad had a collection of other authors who were political authors, right? So
Right.
I experienced a new perspective of what it's like living during communism. They were talking about, you know, the hard reality of the
Mhm.
beginning of when that life was like, right? And I read war stories. And every one of these books, they added to an understanding of what world can be like, how to
Right.
deal with obstacles, and how to escape from reality. I firmly believe reading saved me from you know, just being a wreck and felt and gave me that happiness and connection to my dad. So going forward, I always turn back to reading. When I came to the US and I couldn't speak language, my husband took me to Barnes and Noble, and it was like a 2-story huge building. First of all, I've never seen a bookstore that had 2 stories, right? So it was like,
Yes.
oh, is this a magical land? Did we went through a portal? What's happening, right? So I think I was lost there for 8 hours. Like my husband was like, I don't even know where you are, because I found the sci-fi fantasy section and I disappeared and found Robert Jordan. I read his books. There are 1,000 pages. I found L.M. Montgomery, Anne of Green Gables, which completely different series, but those are the ones that got me started. And then from them, I kept looking for series. You know, I read the Fay Fever, Karen Mary Moaning, and every one of these authors I can get my hands on. Brandon Sanderson, right? And I just kept going and going and soak it up, to learn the language, to have fun. And it really helped to broaden my horizon.
I'm glad you brought up Barnes & Noble, because that is exactly like me. That's actually kind of one of the dreads from my family. Said whenever you go to Barnes & Noble, they say, okay, you got 2 hours. Just let us know where you're at. Because I love to read. There's like the fantasy section, the sci-fi section. Those are my favorite places to go. And I always like finding new stories to like buy. And the dread of my parents say, why do you keep buying so many books? Because you don't have enough room. It's just like, I'll make room. And they always say, but it's better he buys books than other stuff, because I love to read. And if for any kid out there in the 90s or in the early 2000s who may not have gone to Barnes & Noble but remembers Nordstrom's, Nordstrom's was another place you can get books. And I think it was like before Barnes & Noble really started getting popular. Like I remember Nordstrom's, like books were everywhere. There was a bunch of other stuff too, but that was a great place. And again, like you said, reading helps us escape from reality, even just for a little bit. It takes us to a place where it's familiar, it's comforting, it's safe, it's an escapism, which is almost just like films. Films are an escapism from reality. They may mirror reality in our own time, but it's not a direct, oh, this is just like the world we know it is. Like Star Wars. A lot of people said Star Wars has similar elements to reality, but it's not our reality. There's a lot of things you can pick from it. And ultimately, that's what I love from reading. Now, second part to this, and I love this question because I usually get different answers, is what books would you say have been a big inspiration to you? And I usually ask this because sometimes whenever people answer the first question is who are their favorite authors, sometimes their answers are completely different when it comes to books.
That's very true. And as I mentioned, Brandon Sanderson is a huge inspiration. He's my role model. You know, my family sometimes tells me that my writing style is somewhat similar. Obviously, we're not the same. And it's he's world building, his stories. It's what I strive for because it's so clear to me. He loves what he's doing, and I love that. You can tell when you read a great book and you know it, you know, the author put their heart into it. That's what I'm getting out of the Brandon Sanderson books and many other books that I read. Robert Jordan, you know, and then to make things interesting, he was the one who came in to finish Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately passed away before he could see the series completed. And talk about what an amazing way to make sure that Robert Jordan's series is completed so his readers and fans could enjoy the complete series as the author would have wanted to.
Awesome. And you actually brought up something which I actually like to ask this as a little tangent question because I feel it is important. Now, you said that some fans and fans have said your writing is similar to this author. Now, I usually ask this question because I always like getting a response in a sense of like for new authors who are getting their footing, which is, what is your response on like people say that your writing is similar to this author in a sense that, oh, this is the next J.R. Tolkien or the next George R.R. Martin, because as I'm sure you know, whenever we see like new books, they always have these editorial reviews saying the next George R.R. Martin or the next the next author or the similar author to the Hunger Games or Outlander. Like, what is your response to that? Because there is something in the sense of like, oh, okay, our writing is like comparable, but we don't want to be seen as the next so-and-so because that may not be who we're trying to be. What is your like response to that?
A very interesting question and a very interesting comment. I always feel honored when they compare me to someone as great as Brandon Sanderson or J.R.R. Martin or any one of these big famous authors. Of course, we also hope that we will join their ranks. One day, someone will say the next S.G.Blaise, the next Gabriel Garcia, right? So
Right.
that's a dream that we may have. I don't write for the legacy. I don't write to be famous as an author. I would love my book series to be well loved. So my goal is to create a series for my readers and fans that they can't get enough when they ask for the spin-off with other characters, when they ask for the origin stories, when they ask questions like, okay, what's going to happen with the children of these characters? So future stories. I have 4 to probably 5, maybe even more spin-off series in the plans that I started to lay a little clues around the books that readers can see that they're gonna be in the works. Because I plan to write as long as I live, and I'm gonna still writing on my deathbed, putting on the end. Because that's my goal, that's my purpose, and that's what success looks for me.
That's awesome. And you actually brought up another thing, which I was going to ask you too, which is when you began writing The Last Lumenian, did you write it for yourself in a sense that this is a book that you want to buy, or did you write it for a particular audience in mind?
I definitely had a mix, and I had also an ulterior motive. I wanted to create a series. My son, who despises reading, would not be able to put it down. So when I started writing the series, he was around 8. So I
Right.
definitely, purposefully made it PG-13, made it cinematic and page turner. I think I managed with the first book that he almost didn't put it down. The second and third one, not so much. Because right now I'm reading book 4. He always says to me, Mom, I'm only reading it when you're done with the editing. I'm like, okay, I'm fair enough. You don't need to read my grammar mistakes. I can respect that. But that's my goal, is to find and connect with readers who enjoy these stories, who love light-hearted entertainment, and who want to recharge, because it's
Right.
so hard these days to recharge. I don't want to create something depressing.
Right. Right. And especially when it comes to like fantasy, there's a whole different brackets of like fantasy. You have epic fantasy, you have dark fantasy, you have high fantasy, you have dystopian fantasy, urban fantasy. There's a lot of different subgenres of fantasy, which honestly, again, The Last Lumenian is like a perfect balance of like very like if there's like a term like maybe soft fantasy where there's fantasy elements, but it's not like too like big or grand in the sense that it's just not going to complicate the reader, that they're going to enjoy it. Which then leads in probably to another series of questions, which I think are very important, which is sort of like now the author side of this, like actually the marketing and stuff like that. So when you began this journey, S.G.Blaise, and trying to get it published, did you initially want to go the traditional publishing route, or did you decide based on your own research that self-publishing was the way to go? And what have you learned from self-publishing?
Well, before I even, when I started, I thought I'm going to be traditionally published because everyone did the traditional published route. And, it is such an honor for a big publisher to say, we believe in you, right? But the
Right,
more I learned about the publishing routes, the more I realized I don't have time to
right,
wait to be discovered because, well, I'm not getting any younger, let's be honest here.
right.
So I started to see, the pros and cons of both paths, and I realized that for me, the indie publishing route fits my needs because I can have creative control. I have the rights in-house. I can publish on my timeline, a book a year. That's my
Right.
goal. So that felt like it fits what I needed. I'm always open, for other means, but at the time, that's what I decided, and so far, I'm not regretting it.
That's awesome. And I love talking about this question because it is a really great important thing to discuss, which is for those who have known, a lot of authors have provided a lot of great feedback on this topic of traditional versus indie publishing. And there are pros and cons, like you said, for each, but definitely for traditional publishing, as what I've learned recently from another author, Rick Norris. He said the thing about traditional publishing is that if you do get in, great, that's awesome. But you do have to be in mind, you are at the whims of the publisher. They're trying to sell a product. If your product doesn't sell, they'll pull you off from the shelf and they're not going to use you again. And if you go with the route of self-publishing, you have more creative control, but there's a lot of stuff you have to know, which is marketing yourself, really finding ways of selling yourself, like branching out. It takes a lot of time and money. And you got to transition from sort of like the writing hobbyist to the writing professional, because now this is a job. This is like a 9-to-5 job, because you are now trying to make contacts with book houses, with like Barnes and Noble, or like small book publishing companies, saying like, I want to do like a book signing with like your venue, because it's a lot. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of time, but it is it's well worth the the strain and the pain and all of that stuff. And I'm also learning that as well, going with the publishing route with Barnes and Noble, which has been very good so far. And I'm now in the process of getting 2 of my books published, one being a spin-off from the book and the other being an entirely different series. It's a lot of work and a lot of time, which another thing to talk about if you're self-publishing is editors. That is you purchasing the editors. You got to create like a contract saying like, what can you fit in your budget? Not to mention publicists, cover art designers. That's a lot of money. But if you are planned to do this, know that it's going to take a lot of time and money. But if you're dedicated, it'll be worth it.
Oh, absolutely. And you get to build your own team. You will have
Right.
freelance artists that you work with, the illustrators who create the characters, make my words to come alive, and so readers and fans can see this is how Glenna looks like, this is how Lila looks like, right? All those
Right.
beautiful banner decorations when they come to see to my booth at an event, it's from this amazing, talented, illustrator or a map designer, right? So this
Right.
is such a pleasure to create, the team. It is hard work, and
Mm.
marketing is definitely hard work, but you can do it for yourself. You can be your own PR person. It just takes a bit more time, and there's always more solution than one to every problem. You can focus on building your newsletter. You can focus on social
Yes.
media. Whatever is your goal, you can create a plan, a marketing plan around it. You can fit your budget. You can do the event route if you're not comfortable. You can do the social media, YouTube, there's always something to do. And the goal is not to get there fast, but to get there. It's a journey, not a sprint. And
Yes.
everyone will find the audience that fits their books. I firmly believe that.
Definitely. And one last thing before I go on to another question, which I learned from Natalie Wright, who was actually my first of this, I may call this series, LA Festival series, which is probably the most profound thing for self-publishing authors is if you think your debut novel is going to be what makes you, most likely not. That's a hard truth to swallow, because it will take probably maybe your 5th or 4th book to really get your name out there. And from what I learned from her, The Season of Dragon was her 7th book that she self-published. 6 of her books were traditionally published, but no one knew of her from those 6. It was The Season of the Dragon that really made a name for herself. And the one thing she took from it is, now that I've established an audience, they're now realizing I have 6 books already written, and now they're enjoying it. And when I listened to that, I was thinking, that's actually really profound, and it is kind of hard to swallow, but it's true. 9 times out of 10, your debut novel is not going to be what makes you. It may be a few years before someone picks you up or even sees you. But the beautiful thing about that is, let's say you've made 5 books, and your 5th book is what really, really sells you to the public. Now you can tell them, well, if you like this book, I got 4 others I think you would enjoy. And honestly, it's a really profound thing to really consider going into the self-publishing world.
That's so true. And if you really think about it, most readers, they enjoy binge reading. I know I
Yeah.
did. I remember looking at series and I said, okay, they have 3 books, they publish a book a year. Okay, I'm gonna take a chance, right? I'm gonna read. So the cover, very important. It's gonna bring in the readers. Having multiple books out there, we're gonna sell the deal,
Right.
seal the deal, excuse me. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. You really don't know what's that drop that creates that wildfire that ignites it. And yes, it can take a long time. This is not an industry where you can get rich quick. It
No.
shouldn't be. Most of us were doing it because we love this. We will do it till the day we die, and that's important. But yes, it's not the one where we're gonna get rich, and we're not gonna get rich quick. That's for sure.
No. And actually, that leads into my next question is, what are your thoughts on sort of like writing because you loved writing as opposed to writing for the hottest theme? Because one of my friends who I've had a while ago on the podcast, she is a publisher of her own publishing house, Curious Corvette, shout out to Raven White. She said that the dangers with publishing to the newest theme is it's probably not going to be your best work, and probably when you finish, that theme's already gone. So you have to like think about the next theme is going to be like what's new, vampires, werewolves, dystopian. You have to think what's hot now, and you have to plan for that. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that kind of like hinders new authors in the sense that they want to be a part of this snowball effect?
I feel like when you try to cash on or write for the hottest theme, you risk missing out. I believe that we write from the heart, we write authentically, what we believe. So if I try to force a story because this or that is the most popular and that's not what's in my heart, it's not going to read well. So, and remember, the likes, the popularity, it's cyclical. The zombies were popular maybe in the 40s, 60s, and then it came back, when was it, 2000 something, remember? So they're always come back. So good news, if you missed a big popular theme, it will come back. And by then you have 4 books, 5 books out with themes that you enjoyed. And when they get popular, readers will pick up your books. They feel the love. They feel the all that hard work you put in there, not because you wrote for the market, but because you wrote from the heart.
Right. I 100% agree with that. I definitely think it is to like, enjoy writing because it is a process because our writing styles change. We grow older. We learn new things we didn't know for the first time. So I 100% agree. Write and enjoy what you love to write. And if you don't make it to the newest theme, no worries. You can get back when it comes around, which ultimately, that's the thing about writing. Themes always come back, the hottest things always come around, and they usually correlate with the biggest films because film and literature always seem to work together. Which then leads actually into another fun question, which I haven't asked in a long time: is um, what book would you say is like comparable to the Last Lumenian in terms of like story development, characters, themes, and that stuff? And has anyone ever approached you and saying you should make the Last Lumenian into like a movie or like a limited series?
I would say that the Last Lumenian is comparable to maybe the Shadow and Bone series with Leah Bardugo.
Ah, okay.
I've heard a lot of comparisons from readers that I didn't even think of. Shadow and Bone seems to be popping up a lot. Although we do have different type of heroes. They have the reluctant hero, we have the chosen one. But what I like to do in my series is that I understand there is nothing new under the sun. So what I try to do is I combine multiple genres in each book. You have the sci-fi fantasy. We usually have thriller or action adventure. We have a little bit of romance. We have a mystery, right? So that adds more content to the books. And also I try to look ways to twist the familiar tropes, which
Right.
pull the readers. There are a lot of readers who want to read chosen one books, but I look for ways to, how can I twist this? How can I make it into surprising? And I love when the readers and my fans discover secrets alongside with my hero.
Right.
And a combination of all of these can create a different story. You know, we have the classic battle between good and evil, but guess what?
Mm-hmm.
The evil might not be as evil as we think, not as black and white, and the good is not as black and white, right? I
Right.
love that morally gray area and explore what that looks like.
I 100% agree. And honestly, that's why I loved The Last Lumenian, because if I'm being completely honest, very rarely have I found like a good book with like a good female lead in the story. Last Lumenian and Season of the Dragons are, I would say, the only two books in my personal library that actually have like strong female leads. Like I have been looking for that, or like just scounging around. And all the books I have are like equally good. They're great, enjoyable, because in those books they have female characters as like the party, but very rarely do I actually have a story where the female is like the lead. And honestly, I was blown away by Last Lumenian and Season of Dragon. They're like the best I've read this year, which again, kudos to you.
Thank you very kindly, Gabriel. I love this series. I love the storyline. I love that we have diverse characters. I get to explore, you know, how she deals with mental health issues. She has claustrophobia, induced panic
Yeah.
attacks. I'm gonna do some twist on that. I'm gonna tie it to something fun and interesting with dealing with magic. I also strive to put a twist on female myth. You know, we
Right.
have the male myth when the hero goes after his goal and he battles and then he wins. The female myth tends to create community. So I'm looking for a way to, how does a hybrid version look like? What can I do that has a different twist on it? I can't wait to see how this series is going to turn out with all these twists and turns.
Nice, nice. And we're almost nearing the end of the interview. There's a few last questions I do want to ask, so I'll get right to those. So the first question is, which you've probably already answered before, is who have been your biggest supporters in your writer's journey?
I am so fortunate, Gabriel, to meet this amazing community on Instagram. We haven't even met in person. We virtually met. Lashane Arnett, Kristen M. Germain, Laura Harworth, Sarah Wright, just to name a few from a lot of amazing, talented indie authors who are the first to support, first to cheer on. I'm just so grateful that I have met them, and I highly recommend to readers to check them out.
Awesome, awesome. And speaking of that, that actually ties perfectly to my next question, which is probably another big important one is, have you ever had a sense of validation from other authors, other indie authors in the community saying, we liked your work, this is incredible, you belong here? Or do you not seek validation for like your writing, in the sense that you did not write The Last Lumenian for praise or validation like as your main goal, and it just came about naturally?
It's definitely the latter, Gabriel. I am not seeking validation per se. I'm seeking to the reader's opinion. So when I get validation from fellow authors, it's like goosebumps, right? When I went to the Chanticleer 2022 Chanticleer Award Banquet, my book was a finalist. And I had no idea that it's going to be part of a six winners. And then later it became the grand prize winner for the sci-fi fantasy, which is a huge validation. I feel like validation comes when you need the most without even realizing you need it. But
Right.
I just seek to write my stories to entertain readers. And when these magical moments come, I'm just so grateful and honored.
Awesome, awesome. And now we're near like the near end with the last two questions. And this one, I always love asking this because I always love hearing the response to this, which is, in all of your years of being a writer, with everything you've learned, everything you've gone through, everything you've experienced, the highs and the lows, what is your word of wisdom to fellow indie authors out there who really want to get their foot on the ground?
My word of wisdom would be perseverance, keep an open mind, and don't quit. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. There is a community you can build around you that can support you and be there when you launch your book. And just when you think you reach the end of your journey, I promise you that's only a new beginning.
Awesome. Straightforward to the point. I love it. And with that, listeners, we will conclude today's author interviews. But before we officially end today, I want to thank our guest, S.G.Blaise, for joining us today. Thank you so much. Where can people engage with you to know more about upcoming events, new book launches, or where to purchase The Last Lumenian?
The Last Lumenian is available at the usual places: Amazon, Kobo, Google, and all the other, ebook, paperback, and audiobook format. They can find me on my website, sgblaise.com. When they sign up for my newsletter, they get first exclusive look, and they get to see where the next event we're going, which is going to be the San Diego Book Festival, I believe, next weekend. They also can find me on Instagram as S.G.Blaise Official. I'm on Twitter as S.G.Blaise Author. And Facebook, we have a commerce page, the Last Lumenian. And I love hearing from my readers. I also have an email on the copyright page. So if anyone have questions, comments, please don't hesitate to reach out. I love supporting fellow authors, and I love hearing from my readers and fans.
Well, listeners, you heard it here. I will link all of those down below in the description below so you can go check them out. And again, make sure to get a copy of The Last Lumenian. This is a great story. And if you want to hear my initial reviews and reading the first few chapters, I will link that episode of The Last Lumenian book impressions to this podcast so you can go and check it out. But I guarantee you, you will not be disappointed. I mean, this cover is amazing. And the summary behind this is incredible as well. But don't take my word for it. You got to watch the video. And as always, make sure to purchase a copy of The Gathering. I will link that down below. Well, listeners, we have now reached officially the end of this wonderful interview. Again, I want to thank my guest, S.G.Blaise, for joining us today. S.G.Blaise, thank you so much for being here. You've been an amazing guest.
Thank you so much for having me, Gabriel. I had a blast.
You're welcome. And with that, listeners, I will see you on the next author interview or Historian's Lounge or Book Impressions. But until then, this has been the Wandering Scribe signing out.